unfortunately do have a problem, and that problem is checking out far too many library books every time I go into my little library app with the intention is always to check out like 3 to 4 books per like 3-week cycle that you have to like read them before you have to renew or return. And then I'm always like, but what if I add like one more? And then like, what if I add like one more? Like would that be so crazy? So yes, today I will be sharing just a few books that I've checked out from the library lately, things that I'm interested in reading about, learning about, thinking about, and yeah, just a little free book haul. Support your local library. This is the PSA to do so. It's literally one of the most amazing public resources that we have here. And checking out books actually does do something to support them, which is really cool. In no particular order, the first book that I have on this pile here is Seneca's On the Shortness of Life. Seneca is like a Roman Stoic philosopher, and this is an essay basically exploring the nature of time and, in his perspective, the ways that like humans basically waste that time on meaningless activities. And sort of, I think like the central argument in this essay is that we actually do have enough time to do the important things that we want to do while we're here. It's just about being intentional and purposeful with that time. Also, I have read like a couple pages and I already know it's gonna like hit because right in the beginning of the book, I was already like gagged by something that Seneca said here. Again, certain people reveal the most stupid indignation. They complain about the pride of their superiors because they did not have time to give them an audience when they wanted one. But can anyone dare to complain about another's pride when he himself never has time for himself? Yet whoever you are, the great man has sometimes gazed upon you, even if his look was patronizing. He has bent his ears to your words. He has let you walk beside him. But you never deign to look at yourself or listen to yourself. So you have no reason to claim credit from anyone for those attentions, since you showed them not because you wanted someone else's company, but because you could not bear your own. Oh. Oh, that's what I thought when I read that. I'm excited to continue to be hit in the face with very blunt observations about life in the way that we avoid ourselves, avoid what's important in service of what's more like comfortable or easy. The next book I have is Searches by Vahini Vara. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. I don't know too much about this book or the author herself, who's like a tech journalist. But basically this book, to my understanding, explores how the internet and digital technologies sort of shape our sense of identity and personhood and how we like perceive ourselves, express ourselves, and also kind of again like thematically along the lines of like how we create and understand meaning in our lives. And I think this is really interesting because like we are living in our own sort of like industrial age revolution, like with the advancing of like AI technology and even like things like social media, where it's like generations, like my generation, those younger than me, slightly older than me, like all of us are kind of experiencing the impact of these developments in technology without really knowing what the long-term like effects of them like will be on our minds or how we perceive ourselves or one another, how we relate to one another, whether it's like healthy or not. And I don't know, I find it also interesting, and especially just like thinking about self-perception and also like how we curate like a perception of ourselves for others like online. So I don't know, all of that is just like really thought-provoking to me, and it seems extremely relevant, especially like posting content to social media. After just like reading the little inside description a little bit more, I think something that's nice here at the end, it is looking at technological capitalism and thinking about how it both shapes and exploits human existence. But also, I guess she has like a proposal in here for really leaning into human creativity, which is like the thing I think that does make us like unique and sort of separates us from, I guess, like AI and these like technological developments. And using that as a jumping off point for thinking about like how to have more like empowered and free relationships with this technology that we like can't really avoid. And also like how we can think about, again, like more how we're relating to one another. like in this world, in this space. Like, yeah, should be interesting. I'm sorry I don't know more about it, but I am excited to read it. Next I have Lydia Millett's Atavists. The cover is so cool. That's kind of what drew me to this. I'm pretty sure that this was just sitting like when I went to go pick up books from the library. It was just like on one of the display shelves and I was intrigued by the cover. Do I know anything about this author? No. And what I know about this book is very little, but how I understand it, it's like a collection of short stories with a bunch of like interconnected characters. You're following families, couples, individuals, and I'm curious if I'll like it because typically like I don't really enjoy short story collections or like things where there's like a lot of like interconnected characters, but we're kind of like hopping from character to character, like rather than staying with one person throughout the whole book. So we'll see, but always happy to give something a chance, especially when it has a cool cover. I'm realizing as I'm going through this stack, like all these books are basically really outside of maybe what I normally read, and so I'm like not versed at all in any of the material. So this is quite aspirational reads for me, but hopefully will grow me as a person, stretch my brain, and challenge me, and I'm looking forward to that. So with that, next up we have The Sublime Object of Ideology by Slavoj Žižek, who's a Slovenian philosopher or like theorist. I know that this is like considered Žižek's like masterpiece work. I know that it is kind of an examination of human agency in like a postmodern world, and I also know that it can be quite dense, sometimes sort of like rambly, like stream of consciousness, which can make it difficult to follow. And if you're not familiar with other theorists like Lacan or like I think it's pronounced Hegel, or like Marx, like then it may be a really dense piece of literature to chew. And even though this book is probably like one of the most intriguing in the stack to me, like conceptually, after like scrolling in Reddit forums, it seems like even people who do have like a good foundation of like critical theory were like, this is one of the more like challenging books that I've had to read. And, you know, it took me a lot of time to process it. Like, I had to read very slowly and reread, and I'm thinking that I might need to do some like intro to critical theory crash course of like reading or watching some YouTube videos or something before I actually like dive into this, because I'm assuming it's gonna like kind of break my brain a little bit to read, but hopefully I'll come away with some really thought-provoking like ideas to sort of like sit with and like consider my world like through a new lens. Next I have something a little bit lighter. This is Joseph Campbell's The Ecstasy of Being, Mythology and Dance. Joseph Campbell, which is a name that you probably recognize, is like the guy who I guess popularized the like hero's journey and the kind of like archetype that like your typical hero goes through. And that's what I know him from, like my like 10th grade English class. But this book just kind of intrigued me because I know it's like a series of essays on like modern art and dance, and I guess like his thoughts on it. I'm not really sure. Observations about maybe like that and how it supports human nature. I'm just guessing. But it was a series of, I think, like unpublished essays, like originally. And I think it also includes an essay that he was working on like up to when he like died. So some of his like, you know, in some ways like most recent thoughts on like art and life. And basically just because I take dance classes, I was like, oh, this would be fun to read. And that's sort of essentially what drew me to it and why I'm gonna read it. So yes. The next book I have is actually a recommendation from a friend who I met up with a few weeks ago. We were talking about All About Love by Bell Hooks, which I just read recently, and all in all, really liked. I think that there was a lot of paragraphs where I would be like, ooh, like, wait, let me sit with this. And so we were just like getting into a discussion about like relationships and love and how we show up in our interpersonal relationships. And this friend of mine recommended me a book that he had just finished and apparently has been like talking everyone's ear off about, called Love in a Fucked Up World, which is by Dean Spade. I think the main argument here that Dean Spade is going to try to make is that, especially like within our like politics and activism, we're kind of, obviously thinking about things on like a macro scale and trying to like liberate ourselves on this macro scale. But then in our interpersonal relationships, a lot of us are still playing out and acting out like the narratives that we're sort of like taught to subscribe to about like how we relate to one another, like who, what gender roles we're supposed to play, like in a relationship, the sort of like interpersonal politics that we're buying into without really like questioning them and challenging if they're like actually conducive to like a like positive relationship, and also one that's like sort of generative for like broader societal change. And I don't know, but I think he's sort of like on the path of like relationship anarchy and like that sort of train of thought. So I'm curious like just to see like what maybe he brings attention to, like what things kind of like make me realize like my own kind of like subconscious like patterns that I've been acting out in like romantic relationships with people. And excited to allow this to kind of like help me combat these like scripts that I'm playing out in my interpersonal relationships so that I can show up like better, more compassionately, more fair, like, and creating more of a sense of freedom in relationship and connection to one another. So I think it'll be really interesting. And I'm also excited to just like read it and tell my friend that I read his book recommendation, because I'm really, really bad about reading people's recommendations for me. My next book is, in fact, another Rachel Cusk book. This is In the Fold. Basically, I read The Country Life, I think in 2023. It was my very first Rachel Cusk, and I loved it. I thought it was like one of the funniest books I read in a long time. Like I genuinely laughed out loud while reading it, and it really endeared me to Rachel Cusk. And since then, I've wanted to like read all of her novels from like first publication to like the latest. I just read The Lucky Ones maybe like a couple months ago and was feeling the itch for my next Cusk, and so In the Fold it is. And I'm just gonna read you the actual like description in the book jacket because I genuinely have no clue what it's about. The Hanburys of Egypt Hill are the last word in bohemian living, or so they like to think. Their parties are famous, their relationships confusing, their bravado immense. To Michael, arriving at his college roommate's house on the hill for a birthday party, they represent the prospect of relief from the strictures of conformity and an enfolding exuberance to which he feels irresistibly attracted. That one evening and their charismatic presence has lingered in his heart and in his memory. Some years later, reeling from the consequences of his marriage to a beautiful, difficult woman, Michael is invited to visit the Hanburys, and his illusions about their world quickly unravel. I'm gonna stop there because I don't feel like you need any more low-key. But yes, so In the Fold, I think it's sort of going to be like a family drama, and on the inside cover, there was someone who was reviewing it who was like, as always, like it was like savagely written by Rachel Cusk, and I think that is exactly the right way to describe her with the fiction work that I've read from her anyway so far. She is savage with these characters, like really just showing the selfishness of like human nature in a way that is still really poetic and beautiful and compelling, which I think is like a real talent to do, because like she could just make you hate the characters and think that they suck, and sometimes they do suck and sometimes you do hate them, but like you want to keep reading about them normally. Next up is actually an existential text, and I think it's one of like the quintessential ones of the 20th century, and it's The Myth of Sisyphus. This is Albert Camus', I guess, like, story version of the story. To be honest, like, I know that why I wanted to pick up this book is because, like, the idea of Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the hill forever was, like, a concept that I kept bumping into. Like, it was, like, a synchronicity in my life where, like, it just kept coming up, whether it was like in random conversation or like a random like YouTuber was mentioning it, or like some sign that had like a poster with like Sisyphus on it or whatever. I remember that there were synchronicities that like led me to think, oh, I need to read this book now. But I also think I did check this out like 6 weeks ago. and I've not read it yet, so I don't remember what those things were. But we are officially on to the last book of this library book haul, and that is How to Love Better by Young Pueblo, who I believe is like a very popular like internet thought person, like writer, speaker guy. Like, I'm not familiar with his account. I really like truly don't even know like why I know of this book. Like, I feel like it was probably just like randomly like on my story graph, and I was like, oh, let me add that to my to read. And I think after going through my little situationship that I went through earlier this year, it like sent me on this deep dive where I was like, yeah, I need to read all about love by bell hooks, for example, and kind of is just like intriguing me like to want to read like other books on love and relationships. We'll see if I end up enjoying this or not, but hopefully I'll gain something interesting from it anyway, or be able to take something away. But basically it's thinking about love and relationship through the lens of self-awareness and compassion, and how that can make us better, probably in relationship with ourselves, and also better in relationship with our partners and others. So should be nice. Anyway, thank you so much for sitting with me through this book haul of books that I truly don't know enough about to speak on. Hopefully it wasn't too painful. Hopefully maybe you found a book recommendation that you also want to read. Maybe we can read it together and discuss it at a later point whenever I eventually do knock down this big pile. I will do it. I promise. I'm really excited. I think there's some big thinkers in there. I think my brain is gonna be hurting, but also growing, so that's good. And yeah, happy reading.